Hi, I'm Alex, welcome to the channel and thanks for tuning in. So earlier this week, HITID officially became the first cannabis retailer listed on the Nasdaq. This is a huge development, but it seems as though because HITID did not replicate what MindMed did, in the sense of a massive run up in the stock price ahead of the uplisting, that many investors do seem to be disappointed. Now personally, I don't think this is the right way to be looking at this and thinking about it, and in this video we'll explore exactly why I say that. Also, I do have in the coming days updates on several other stocks I have covered on the channel before but haven't spoken about for a while, specifically GNOG, STEM, PaySafe, among others. So if you're bored of the HITID videos or want a bit more variety, don't worry, these will be coming soon. It's not that I've lost interest in these companies in any way, it's more that there haven't been any material updates, and on this channel I don't want to just make videos telling you what you already know. All of these videos which are coming will be interesting and will be worth your time though, so if you're interested in those stocks, then those are videos you definitely want to check out. Please, in our battle against YouTube clickbait, can you smash the like button? It's massively helpful in showing the YouTube algorithm that it doesn't only need to push clickbaity content, which often is misleading and misinformed. It's really working, you're doing a great job so far, so please keep it up. It's massively appreciated. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to join the private Discord, the live video calls and everything else, then check out the Patreon page in the description. And as always, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is purely for educational and entertainment purposes only, but let's get straight into it. So it was announced a couple of weeks ago, but earlier this week, HITID became the first cannabis retailer globally to be listed and trading on the Nasdaq. Now this is massive news, and we've discussed this on the channel many times already, but this is also just the start of where it gets exciting. Since the uplisting has been effective, HITID has also announced 3 new store openings, and despite this, the stock price has not performed amazingly, and many people are disappointed by this. Now quickly digressing, I have shared analysis before the reverse split which showed the financial impact and the impact on the valuation of HITID from new stores being opened. Now whilst the overall valuation number stands true, the stock price clearly has changed, so if you just take that same analysis, multiply the impact by 15, then that will be correct. And so if you haven't seen that, I definitely recommend checking it out because it will give you an idea for what impact each new store opening should have on the valuation of the company. Now ultimately I think this will flow through to the valuation and impact the company when the company announces its results towards the end of this month. We'll touch on that more in a moment, but if you haven't seen that video, I do recommend checking it out. Now anyway, back to the point. As I have said so many times when talking about HITID on this channel, this is a really long-term opportunity. It will take time for management to deliver on the growth strategy, and so you need to be patient. Every large company which is publicly traded stock goes through periods just like this. For example, just look back at the historic stock price charts for many established companies today. For example, Amazon, Tesla, Starbucks, McDonald's. All of these companies have been through periods when they were growing where it took time for the stock price to reflect the potential and the growth that the company was delivering on. That is where HITID is today, and it's still at the very early stages of delivering on its strategy and proving out its overall model to investors, so we need to be patient. I also think that recent market dynamics may have meant that recently investors are becoming increasingly less patient. Everyone just wants quicker gains more easily, but ultimately this is not something that's sustainable in the long run. If you don't have that patience, then I'm sure that you can find some other companies to invest into where you can chase those quicker gains. HITID is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's an exciting company with a differentiated model, a strong management team capable of delivering on that, and which should generate significant shareholder value as it grows. But this is not something that's going to happen overnight, like a short squeeze, for example. Now what comes next is really important, but so are the learnings which we can take from other stocks which have recently uplisted to the Nasdaq. We'll look at recent examples and see potentially what this means for HITID as well. From this uplisting, investors can expect to see some positive catalysts for the stock price on the horizon, both in the very near term but also in the longer term too. Now the first of these is that I expect to see a number of new analysts initiating coverage on the stock with positive price targets from the current valuation and with buy ratings on HITID too. Now from the syndication agreement that was filed a couple of weeks ago, we know that certain institutions have already taken a position in HITID, namely Roth Capital, Desjardins Securities and Beacon Securities. Now it is very common that such firms, which also have analysts which cover other stocks in the cannabis sector, when they make an investment into a company like HITID, they will also start covering the stock as analysts as well. Now how do we know that if they do that, they will have buy ratings on the stock? Now this is a good question and it's one that I have been asked a few times. However, given that we know they have recently invested into HITID, they clearly as an organisation have a strong degree of conviction in the company, its strategy and its ability to execute on this. From that, we can probably take confidence that they will likely be bullish on the stock as an analyst as well. That should mean a buy rating from the analyst and also a positive price target where there's significant growth from where the current stock price is. Now, new respected analyst coverage is really important and is always good news for stock price. Now, personally, I expect to see this develop over the next month or couple of months perhaps, and whether it's just one of those analysts or even two or all three do start covering the stock, this will be a good near-term price catalyst. Now, the next thing I think we will see more of is institutional capital and ETF inclusion for HITID. Now again, this is great news as it shows professional investors who previously could not invest in HITID before the uplisting, having strong conviction in the company's ability to execute its strategy and increase its valuation. Now, what can also not be underestimated here, and is also hard to predict and quantify, is the potential benefit from a broader range of retail investors being able to invest in HITID. Apps like Robinhood, Webull, and many others will now allow for free or low commission access to invest in HITID. Now, we have seen over the last 18 months how the retail investor can be extremely powerful in driving price action in stocks. And so with thousands and thousands of new investors suddenly being able to access HITID stock, I think there could be an exciting dynamic at play here too. However, this is not going to happen overnight, it will play out over the coming weeks. We've already seen HITID begin trending on apps like StockTwits, which clearly is a good sign, and the more attention which a stock gets on similar social media platforms, the more potential new investors which it may attract. Now let's see how this one plays out, but I think this could be really exciting. Now this is not something which happens overnight, it takes some time for the awareness of the company to grow and for the news and developments to spread into the market. It's not like every Robinhood user is sitting at home waiting for the HITID to become available on the platform. The awareness will spread over time, and real corporate developments are exactly what will help drive that increased awareness. Now that leads me quite nicely onto the next point, which is around the quarterly results. Now this is likely to be good news for the company and is exactly one of those corporate developments which will help raise awareness for the company. And it will become clearer to the market at that point the effectiveness of the strategy and the company's ability to deliver impressive growth despite the challenging conditions with lockdowns and other COVID restrictions in many of its key markets. Now, the other catalyst to discuss is M&A and how this creates massive value. Now, I'm not going into this again now. I've discussed it loads recently and loads before on this channel, so please check out those videos if you're not familiar with how this can create so much value for the company very quickly. However, we know that HITID has quite a specific signature in the companies which it acquires. They acquire companies with very strong strategic rationale, where there's a clear potential to drive incremental revenues through its combination into the group and to generate cost savings through the elimination of duplicate costs. The final tenet of this acquisition strategy is the way they pay incredibly low prices for these companies. Now this is ultimately a huge driver for why the company is able to create so much value like this. Now paying such low prices is ultimately one of the key drivers for how the company is able to create so much value through this strategy, and they achieve this by ensuring that the selling shareholders also remain invested in the combined group. And if you look back at the last 3 deals they've completed, Meta Growth, Smoke Cartel and FabCBD, the founders have maintained a role in HITID going forward, but they've also had a portion of the price that they received for selling their company to HITID in HITID shares. Now what this does is it changes the dynamic where the seller is also a buyer as well. Having a share in the combined business changes their incentivization from maximising their value today and instead giving them alignment to the long-term vision and strategy of the HITID group. Now this is definitely something which I expect to see continue. However, as a seller of your company, for many reasons, there are many reasons why shares in a Nasdaq listed company are a more attractive proposition as a way of being paid than those in an OTC Canadian listed company. So from here, I think we'll continue to see the company identify the best acquisition targets and progress some of these by making good acquisitions at great valuations. I think perhaps as well, we will see the company do some slightly larger deals and get a larger deal over the line, and also perhaps target opportunities in the US, which would help them further differentiate from the MSOs over there. Now, one important consideration here, though, is integration. Now, I have discussed this before, but it's important to highlight this here again. Anyone can acquire loads of companies and put them together into a larger group, but integration is the key here. A key part of that incremental value creation is integration, and is Raj Grover, the CEO, and his team successfully integrating those companies into the HITID group. That's driving new sales through cross-sell, and also driving synergies and saving costs there. So far they've done this really well, and I think we will continue to see this when the next earnings get released. Now, something which everyone seems to ask is what will happen to the price from here, with a specific focus on the near term. Now, this is not something which I have speculated much on in relation to HITID, because I've said a number of times, this is a long-term investment for me, and so I actually don't focus on short-term price movements too much. There are so many factors that can influence the stock price in the short term. What I do have confidence in is the long-term strategy. Short-term movements really are just a drop in the ocean compared to this. However, I think there are certainly learnings which we can take from those recent examples of companies which have applied to uplist to the Nasdaq and look at these in relation to HITID. The one which gets discussed the most is probably Mind Medicine or MindMed. For those not familiar with it, it's a pre-revenue company focused on the discovery, development, and production of psychedelic-related medicinal products. In mid-April, it announced that it had been accepted to uplist to the Nasdaq, and over the next few days, the share price increased by over 100%. From that point, it fell back somewhat, and over a period of 2 weeks, it fell back by over 30%. Now, in light of this, many people are asking whether the same can be expected from HITID. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, I can't forecast what's going to happen, but there clearly are some data points which we can look at and which we can try and use to understand whether these will give us some indication of what may happen for HITID. Now, clearly the run-up in stock price for HITID up to the point of the uplisting being effective was much smaller than it was for MindMed. Not only is a smaller run-up more sustainable, but it also indicates a lesser degree of speculative action and could also act as an indicator that we're less likely to see a more meaningful pullback, or perhaps one of a smaller degree than we saw in the case of MindMed. So now let's look at the potential dynamics at play here, which could lead to a more meaningful pullback. Now, one of these is the prevalence of short-term traders taking positions in HITID to capitalise on the opportunity from the catalyst, which is being uplisted to the Nasdaq, and then exiting their position once the uplisting is effective. This would clearly be a strategy that many people would have seen work very effectively with MindMed and then may seek to replicate that again here. I also do think there are a number of investors in HITID still who don't totally understand what they have invested into, and at this point in time may still be marginally in the red and may see this as a good opportunity to exit their position without losing too much capital. Selling pressure caused by this could ultimately lead to a pullback, and that's a dynamic we should keep in mind as well. Personally, for HITID, I don't think we're going to see a 30% pullback or something of that scale, but as I said before, I don't have a crystal ball and nobody is able to predict these things. I also think there are a number of counterfactors which also make the argument against any pullback being too material, or if there is one, that being much more short-lived, and following that a clear path to how this could push towards delivering its all-time highs again. Firstly, the uplisting to the Nasdaq for HITID has been worked up with advisors, professional investors, ETFs, loads of parties, all in acknowledgement that this corporate action will be in the best interest for stockholders. Now, we know that there will be an inflow of more institutional capital into HITID. We've seen some of that already, and we will see more. When comparing it to MindMed, MindMed is pre-revenue, whilst HITID clearly isn't, and this dynamic alone makes it a much more attractive proposition for institutional investors. Indeed, many institutional investors can't invest in pre-revenue companies, or even psychedelic-related businesses still. Sure, this will probably change over time, but the key here is that institutional capital inflow and demand may well create a buying pressure, which will help drive the stock price up. HITID also already has analyst coverage from respectable analysts, and we can expect to see more coverage in the coming weeks. This is not something which MindMed had at this point of its uplisting either. Again, this is an important dynamic not to overlook. Now, the other dynamic here that's important to think about is sector sentiment. Now, it's easy to forget or overlook when thinking about things on a micro level, but it's always important to step back and take a look at the bigger picture. Sentiment is transient, and by that I mean sentiment is not permanent. It changes, develops and evolves. Whether this is between asset classes, between growth or value stocks, between sectors, however you look at it, sentiment does change and evolve. Currently the sentiment is shifting towards a more positive and bullish one, and clearly HITID will benefit from this, and the timing of this uplisting is good in that respect, and so that may well also help the stock price in the near term as well. It won't stay positive forever, it will change, but for now this is clearly a good sign. Just remember, sentiment is transient and cyclical. So in summary, whilst it's impossible to predict what will happen to the stock price over the coming weeks, it's not something which bothers me too much. I'm here for the long term. I know the company is clearly delivering on its strategy effectively. It's delivering growth both organically and through M&A, and all of this is driving increases in shareholder value. These movements now will be a drop in the ocean compared to where the company will be valued at in the next couple of years. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please smash the like button. If you're new to the channel, make sure you're subscribed. If you want to see more content, want to join the private Discord and the live video calls, then check out the Patreon group. And as always, please let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment section below. I find it so interesting to hear all the different perspectives and opinions, so please get involved. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.